Your teen doesn't hate math. They hate something else. And you see it every time they're in that deep stare looking at their homework like it's written in some kind of ancient code. Just ask them, what are you doing? Explain this to me. Watch what happens. They can't explain it. And it's not because they don't get it necessarily. It's not because they're not a math person, but because they have no idea what the steps actually are. They have no idea what they should be doing. And what we tend to do is we jump to the typical explanations. They're just not a math person. This is too hard. They learn differently. They have a different learning style. They're more creative on the creative side of things. They're just not that great at memorization. And it's none of those are the real issue. That's not actually what's going on here. Kids don't hate math. They hate following steps that they don't understand. We might even say that's true of us adults, right? I hate doing things and just going through the routine motions when I don't understand what I'm doing. I mean, just imagine somebody hands you a set of instructions and it's written in a language you can't follow, and they say, do this, put this together. That's what you're going to have, that same look as your kid, like they're looking at ancient code. Let me prove it to you. Let's just walk through one of the simple math applications. If you put the equation x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0 in front of them, a typical math equation for algebra, most kids learn this. What they learn is factor this equation. Set each factor equal to 0, solve it, get the right answer, but they still say, what did I just do? They can solve the math. We can teach them in algebra how to set this equation up and solve it for for what we would call the zeros. But they don't know what they did. They don't know why they did it. And what's the point? Now let's give this math a real meaning, right? So imagine instead you run a small tutoring business from a homeschooler, right? You're tutoring other homeschoolers. Your profit each month depends on how many students you serve and how many students you have. Profit curves in real life are rarely straight. They tend to bend where revenue and cost head. So a profit curve showing you how much profit you're making. So this profit model might look like this curve that's described in this equation, because the equation that we just looked at is actually a description of something that's really happening in real life. And we oftentimes visualize that on a graph. So it could describe how much profit you have based upon how many students, where X is the number of students. So when I set it to 0 there, like I originally had, x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals 0, that is where my profit is equal to 0. All right, that's not what we want to do, but that's what we call in business a kind of a break-even point, where I'm not losing money, but I'm not making any money, because a lot of businesses, let's face it, especially when they start, are losing money, and they want to figure out how many students do they need to get to break even, to know whether it's worth it. And that is exactly what that equation might solve, right? But that's when we get to every single equation in algebra, it has a real life application. In this case, it's where the business stops losing money and starts to make money. And that's something we want to solve for. So where does an equation like this come from? It comes from real data, real conversations. It comes from more or less word problems. So for instance, profit is revenue minus cost. That's what we know of as in business, right? Profit is revenues minus cost. As you gain students, you become more or less efficient. Maybe you need extra materials, extra resources, extra planning tools, or maybe you need to work faster and handle these tutoring sessions in a different way. When these things happen, they form curves, and when we model them mathematically, they form curves in real life, and the curves in real life, or this equation in real life, tells us something, and it tells us what we need to do to get back to profit or to get profitable. So when this happens, the math curves, just like the real life, right? It's in curves. It's not a straight line. It's not obvious to figure out what to do. It creates this equation, and it creates this quadratic equation. Now, when you solve this equation, you're not just plugging in numbers anymore, right? When I give you this equation the first time and I showed it to you, and it's just a bunch of, it's x, plugging in x, what am I doing? I'm solving for where all this becomes zero. At what points in x does the equation become zero? Well, that's boring. I mean, there's no point to that. Why am I doing that? It's just an exercise in futility unless you just get into math, right? But when we solve this in real life, where we're talking about x is the number of students I need, you're finding the break-even appointments of real business, and now it has meaning. And that's the whole point here. We're looking for meaning. Mathematics is nothing but a language that we speak to describe what's going on, oftentimes in science, but business is a form of science in this case. You know, kids, I don't think they hate math any more than adults hate math. They just hate doing steps they don't understand why they're doing them. It doesn't have any meaning whatsoever to them, and so it's boring and it's pointless. So we've seen students in engineering and in just math courses where they think they just really, really hate math. And a lot of students in engineering, even though they may be pretty good at math, not really big fans of math. They're fans of the science, and the math is connected to the science, and so they see a point to it. But when students start to see examples of where math really applies in the real world, that's when they start to connect. It has some meaning. And we have to continue to try to connect meaning to the math. Otherwise, we're just doing a bunch of exercises. It's really a lot like learning grammar, right? I don't know a whole lot of people who really geek out on learning grammar and the grammar rules because, well, they seem boring to me. What's the point? I'm just learning how to put sentences together. However, when I start writing stories, or when I start reading more, and I maybe start studying how different people write, and how maybe I write for a business versus I write for entertainment versus how I might write a blog post or something, it starts to have some meaning. Maybe even when I use some of the tools that are on the market, right? So like Grammarly or Grammar Checkers, it starts to have some meaning to me, and I start to see the point of the grammar is for me to communicate my ideas clearly, or for me to understand clearly the ideas being communicated to me. It now has a point. Math is no different. It is a language in trying to make a point. Unfortunately, most math textbooks and most math classes are just going through the grammar. That's just how it's been done. And that's frustrating to students, and it's frustrating to teachers. So if your student is frustrated with math, start with this question. Do they understand what the steps mean? And these are questions you're going to ask yourself. Do they understand what the steps mean? So you start asking that yourself, and then you ask them, do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand why? Because if they don't, the frustration is not really their fault. They're just frustrated because you're asking me to do a bunch of things. I don't understand why. You don't have to be a kid for that to be frustrating, right? That's exactly how we try to teach math, and all of our courses. That's how we try to teach the mathematics along with the science in the schools of engineering. Most of the schools of engineering make an attempt to do that. But you're looking for a meaning first, and the methods or the steps come second. Our algebra and geometry courses are linked below if you want to see what that looks like.